Okay. Any questions so far? Because I'll just take it a little bit further and talk about the fact that you can run from the command line with this.
A couple of questions. So the mapping between the SpecFlow phrases and then into the C# stuff.
Yeah.
How do you manage duplication with those?
Okay.
So, I mean, if your example was better, I search for edge words. I mean, you know, that's happened all over our application and potentially needs to be implemented in many different ways.
Yes, yeah. So there are a number of ways of doing that. First of all, in here, that I'm logged in with KeyPass. So if we were searching for something like edge words, so we could actually, first of all, we could make that a parameter like KeyPass, and then we can change that value, and that value gets passed into the method. Secondly, the way we write these, when it comes into the code, the whole idea of sort of Gherkin is that in here we can use regular expressions. So we can use wildcards and we can say, oh, it might be uppercase or it might be lowercase. So we can actually add some flexibility and a little bit more robustness by using regular expressions. So when it does a match, it doesn't have to be an exact match. We can actually define what the match would be, the match parameters, using regular expressions. You can also, in SpecFlow, interestingly, you can actually do this. You can have more than one definition for one method. So here's my method that we get invoked. But here you can have actually more than one definition. So for example, I could put, so now it would work whether it's lowercase I or uppercase I. So both of those would trigger the same method, or they could even be written slightly differently. So you can reuse methods. So if you've got some code that does something you want, but somebody's written the actual step slightly differently, then that's fine. You can say, well, it's the same method, that method would get invoked, but it would work for either of these matches. But the main way it's implemented is using regular expressions. And then if things are going to change, just like I've done in here, then we can put those values in quotes, and then those get passed in. You know, those can be anything. So I can change that. So just to show you that, if I open KeyPass, right, so currently we're creating it in the general category, and I've just opened it to see what else there is. So let's say Windows, let's create it in the Windows category. So if I close that, let's change general to Windows. Okay, build the solution. I think that's all saved, isn't it? That's it, and then we'll just run that. Okay, so now you can see it's selected the Windows category instead of the general category. So we can be very flexible with our matching. We can use multiple definitions. We can use regular expressions. If we've got different values, we can pass those in using the quotes like I've done there, general or Windows, so I can choose the category. Or we can even use tables. So within Gherkin, you can actually create what they call example tables, and you can have a number of data values in there, and it will just iterate through the table. So you can get it to loop, you know, do the same step, but a number of times. So we could, for example, add entries to a number of different categories. We could have a table of values for which categories and what values we want to put in for our entries. So it's sort of quite flexible, really, Gherkin. There's quite a lot to it. But yeah, the whole idea is that your methods are separated, and just the way that you write your step definitions here, the matching, means that you can use that same method for multiple feature files and multiple scenarios.
So there's not a direct link between the name of the feature file and the name of the...
No, it searches in the entire project. So I could have hundreds of feature files, and I could have everything just in one, one object class if I wanted. Basically, when you run this, it is searching through all of your object classes within the entire project. So no, it doesn't have to be, I've done it very neatly there as a one-to-one mapping, but no, it doesn't have to be at all.
Okay. And so how do we manage it if the same phrase has to do two different things?
Right. If it has to do two different things, then you either need to use different phrases, or you would pass a value in, and then your actual method in here. So your actual method here. So like this it's passing a value in, P0 as a parameter, and then here you could say if the parameter is this, then do this, else do something else. So that's basically, you would have to do that in the logic of your code. Now this is the only warning here is, what you're doing with BDD is you're creating an automation framework, and this is what I was trying to say to yourself, Emma. You're losing record and replay. You're going to have to start coding, and it puts more of a load on the person that's doing the automation, because writing features and scenarios is pretty simple. But you've got to take these very high level steps, and you've got to try and work out all the code that does that behind the scenes, and you've got to do that from the ground up by typing in code. So that's the thing, really. It's, as you say, you could have a feature that you want to do lots of different things, and you could do that, but it just means that the person who's writing the automation has got to write a very clever method that says, right, if it's this, do this, if it's something else, do something else. And it puts more of a burden on the person who's writing the automation code.
Okay, so I'm not familiar with the Gherkin grammar particularly. Is it that brief all the time? Can you have more than one given?
Yeah, you can have. You can have ands, and so let's give you. I'll give you a very simple example here, or in fact, let's. I'll tell you.
Show me a complicated one. That would probably make me put my mind at ease easier.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So let me give you a very quick example. Let's do here. Oh no, not Cucumber. Let's go into SpecFlow. That would make more sense. SpecFlow slides. Okay. So as I say, we do, the training course we do we don't do with Ranorex, we do it with WebDriver, but the whole of sort of day one is really just around using Gherkin. So there are a few things in here. You can, for example, you can have a background. So if the given is the same for lots, so imagine if I was testing that KeyPass and I might have lots of scenarios and they all have to log into KeyPass first. Well, there's no point in me rewriting that over and over again. So you can have what's called a background step, and this would apply to every scenario in the feature. So the background here is given that I'm logged into the administrator as an administrator. So that means that would be executed for this scenario and any other scenarios. So if your sort of given step is going to be repeated over and over again within a feature file, then you can actually just create what's called a background step, and that will then apply to every scenario to save obviously repeating yourself over and over again. We've already talked about this one. If you use single quotes for a value, then it gets passed through as a parameter. So this means then you can change that value, and the automation code picks that up. The value gets passed through as a parameter to the method, and then you can change that. Right, scenario outlines. So you can have what are called example tables. You can say, right, here's a scenario, but this scenario, I need to repeat this 3 times with different values. So you can actually create what's called a table, an example table, and you can have the headings, username, password, result. Okay, so it would look like this. Here's a scenario. Given that I'm logged as an administrator, when I add a user to the system with this username and password, and what it will do, it will actually pick these values up from the table that you defined as part of that scenario. Then I can see the username listed in the user list. So this then would repeat that scenario, or this, in this case, the scenario 3 times for Bob, John, and Paul. So you can actually use multiple data values and parameterize your scenario, which is quite common. You can also do that inline. So this is the same idea, but this would actually just iterate this individual step, the then step. Then I see in the search results, and it would look for this, and then it would look for this. So just going back to that, using an example table is going to iterate the entire scenario all of the steps within the scenario. Whereas if you put a table inline, it will then just iterate that individual step. Let's come out of that one. Let's go back to this one, and I'll just give you an example of having sort of, which you mentioned a moment ago. Descriptions. Here you go. This is what I want. So within Gherkin, you also have a but and an and. So here's an example. Scenario is forgotten my PIN number. I go to a cash machine and I've forgotten my PIN number. So given that I've got £500 in my bank account, when I attempt to withdraw £50, but I've forgotten my PIN, and I make more than 3 invalid attempts, then the cash point will not allow the withdrawal and the cash point keeps my card. So you can create more complex scenarios, and that's quite common, but the whole idea of BDD is that your scenarios are written at a very high level. Normally they should only be a maximum of about 5 steps. If you are writing them much more detailed than that, and they've got like 20, 30 steps in, then probably what you're doing is writing a test case. You're not writing good BDD. You are writing test cases because you're going into too much detail. Remember, these are meant to be very simple, high level, collaborative, English-like. So think of them much more akin to user stories that you would write in Agile. You know, user stories, you're writing them, they're quite short, number of steps, you know, you put them on a post-it note. This is the same idea. Where all the complexity, and this is what I was saying before, where all the complexity and the hard work goes is in whoever's doing the automation. So it's sort of the technology side is the part that becomes more complicated, whereas the business side, writing your user stories, features and scenarios is meant to be quite high level, very easy for everyone to understand.
Okay, and so that's the code that sits behind that. Each of those single steps is implemented.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
Separate step to the.
No, so each of those steps gets executed. That's right. Each time you write a given, when, then, but, and, each one of those will create a method, and you write the automation code for that. Let's just go to, this is going back to the BDD webinar, because this is the important thing. Let's just take a very simple example here. Okay, so this is the separation. This is test-driven development. This is test-based. So you've got a test name, and the test is broken into steps. I know I'm teaching you all to suck eggs, but this is what it look. Here's a step. This is the same thing. Step 1: open Firefox and go to this URL. Expected result: Google homepage is loaded. Step 2: click in the search field and type Edgewords and click enter. Expected: the search results are returned. Step 3: validate that Edgewords appears as one of the return search values. Now that is not BDD. That is writing a test script, and the test script has got steps. They're very detailed. Each step has got the user action. It's got the expected result. This is what BDD looks like. So this is the same, exactly the same as this is in BDD. Scenario: Google search for TSG. When I search for TSG on the Google search page, then TSG appears in the results. You are not detailing how to do it step by step, because if you were, you are writing test scripts. You are not writing BDD. So BDD is much higher level, but if you think about it, you've still got to do everything that's over on the left-hand side as an automation person, but that's hidden away. So you're moving, the complexity is being moved really from the business layer down to the technology layer.
Okay. One more question before you move on. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
I'm kind of thinking about how we do this at scale. We've got between 50 and 100 features landing on a daily basis. How do we manage? I'm kind of got stuck on the duplication of these phrases because they seem like we're just going to get clashes of terminologies.
Yeah,
so often.
And you may well do. So a part of BDD, remember BDD is all about collaboration. So part of BDD is like up front, you need to decide how you're going to write your Gherkin. You know, how are you going to write your features? For example, here, this is probably a good example here. If I look at this, I've been a bit lazy here because this begins with a capital and then these don't. So if somebody else wrote that same step there in another scenario, so let me give you an example. Let's create another scenario. Let's call that add entry. Okay, now somebody is actually basically doing the same as I want to do there. Now, it might be hard to tell from there, but that has turned purple. And the reason that's turned purple is because that is different from that, because it's case sensitive.
Okay.
So yeah, now I can get round that, because when I write my method, I can say, right, when the I is passed in, it could be upper or lower. So I can make it case insensitive at the code level if I want. But something that you kind of do need to agree on, really, you know, and the whole point of BDD is collaboration, but something you need to sort of talk about before you start writing all these features is really, right, what we're going to do it all in lowercase, or we're going to, you know, and how are we going to use this and that, and you will find that you will get some duplication. I think it's inevitable. So there's always going to be sort of rough spots that need ironing out. Oh, can everyone hear me still? It's not a bit funny.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I must admit, I'm in exactly this point where John's just got to, because I've been writing a lot of BDD Gherkin, and I get to the point where I'm thinking I'm rewriting the same thing over and over, but in different places around different checks, and I start to think, I feel like I'm perhaps wasting a bit of time here. So I was starting to wonder if there's a way I could have a library that I'm, you know, because this is a classic thing I'm going to do several times, but I guess that's what you've just answered there, is in that one particular feature, as long as it's in the same.
Yeah. So if I take that, let's, you know, so say I was actually going to be doing a step repeatedly like this, you know, I'm logging into KeyPass repeatedly, and then I'm doing some other things in here. So let's, I don't know, this one is going to put it in general. And I don't know, let's just delete that so we've got something different there. Right, now this step is the same as this step, and I might be copying and pasting this and doing this repeatedly. So what I would actually do here is, right at the top, I would create a background, if I could spell. Oh, there it is. Oh yeah, got IntelliSense here, good. Background, and what I would do is I would take that step, and I would take it out of there, and I would put it there, and I would get rid of it from both of those, because when you define a background step, this gets applied to every scenario within that feature. So this just saves me repeating this and potentially, you know, making spelling mistakes or whatever I might do. So steps can be repeated, but yeah, there's not an idea of sort of libraries of stuff that you kind of reuse. There is at the, obviously you can do that at the code level, no problem doing that at code level. But remember, features are meant to be very simple. So you don't have sort of features calling other features or anything like that, because they're meant to be collaborative. Everyone with no coding, no experience of anything, should be able to open a feature file and read it and understand it. You know, that's the point of them, that they're kind of English-like, and then there's no complexity to them. The complexity happens at the code level.
That's brilliant. That helps me. Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. That same scenario that I'm going through in each of the scenarios, set it as the background. It's then explicit in each step, which is, yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Okay, now there's more to Gherkin than that, but obviously I can't deliver you guys a BDD course on Gherkin, because you know that's what we do and sell. So and there isn't time to do it either. But it's just, you know, it's just showing you, and really, as I say, I have to be a bit careful today, because the scope of today was really just to show you that it is possible using the Ranorex API, because you know normally, you know, a lot of people use things like WebDriver, you know, Selenium to do this, but it is possible to do it using Ranorex. Okay, so let's remove some of that. Oh, I shouldn't have done that, should I? Let's just put that back. I'm just going to put that back to what it was now, because I just want to show you the fact that, or one of the reasons I'm using NUnit as well. Because, okay, so Emma, you asked me about, you know, can you plug all this into continuous integration, which is obviously a hot topic, you know, and very common now. Okay, so I've just built the project, And this is back to where we were at the beginning. And we've seen that I've run this one scenario and we've seen it works fine. Okay, now, if you remember when I did the references and I went to the NuGet packages, installed, I actually installed NUnit, which I've got some an assert in. I've got some in my code there, but I also installed this NUnit.console, and the reason I did this because this allows me then to run my project from the command line. Okay, so let's just close that. Let's go to right-click on here and open this in File Explorer. Here it is, and if we look in Packages, so here are my NuGet packages. Here's the NUnit console. No, it's in the console runner. And I go into Tools. Okay, there's something in here called NUnit-console.exe. And this allows me to run my BDD project from the command line. So if we actually have a look at the project itself, because I've gone build solution, so I've built this solution, so it's now compiled that into an assembly, and if I go into the project, bin for the binaries, debug, here it is. So this DLL here is this project compiled. Okay, so all of my object classes, my feature files, the whole project has been compiled to a DLL. And all I need to do is pass that DLL to that NUnit console runner to run it from the command line. So let me show you that. Let's just close Visual Studio. Okay, so I've got nothing open at all, and I've made a little batch file here on my desktop. And if I just click Edit, we can see it's very, very simple. Okay, here it is. This has just got two steps in. The first step is actually just changing directory. So all I'm doing is setting the current directory to my project that we were just in. There's my Visual Studio project, into the bin, the binaries, into the debug folder. Okay, and then the next step is using, you can see it there, the NUnit3 console.exe. So we're using that NUnit runner. And all I'm doing is passing in the DLL, which is my compiled project. So all I've done is built the project, and then I'm using NUnit3 console.exe, passing it the project, the compiled project. There it is. There's my DLL. And that will run it for me. Okay, so let's see that. I'm just going to double click the batch file. It will now be using SpecFlow to parse those feature files and invoking the associated methods. And there we go. We can see the automation kicking in. So I'm now just executing all of my feature files through the command line. Now you can filter with that again through the command line if you're using tags, which you should be using to organize your features or your scenarios. You can actually say which tags. So you can say, right, I actually want to run my functional scenarios or whatever you want. You could use tags to manage that. But you can see that's worked. And again, if I go back into the project, Visual Studio, projects, here's my demo. What it does is NUnit actually creates an NUnit test result file, which is text file in XML format. Now this is very useful because your continuous integration tool, Bamboo, Jenkins or whatever, can actually pick up on these results files and publish the results. So you've got a couple of options here. Before we look at, in fact, let me just start up. I've got Jenkins on this machine. I haven't got Bamboo, but let's just, I'm going to start up Jenkins because it's exactly the same. Anything that will execute stuff from the command line will do this. So let's just open that up. But before I do that, I'm just going to show you something that's really good fun, which is called Pickles. And this is open source. This is, it's free, this one. In fact, let's just run that as an administrator. Okay, so if you are actually writing feature files, and it doesn't matter what you're using, you can just be using text files, anything at all, and it doesn't matter what automation tool you're using. There is an open source tool called Pickles, and there's a command line version, or there's a UI, user interface version, Pickles UI. And as I say, this can just be installed, and this is really useful. So in here you can point it at the folder that contains all your features. Okay, so here's the feature directory. These are all my features. This is the project that we were just looking at, and all I'm doing is pointing it at the features folder. You can then tell it where you want the results to go. So I've created a folder called results, and you can tell it which tags you want to exclude if you want to exclude certain features or scenarios. You can give the project a name, it can be anything in here. And then down here, if you've actually run that using NUnit, or if I click on this, you can see anything really, MS Test, Spec Run, if you're using the paid version of SpecFlow. But here I am using NUnit. Okay, so as you saw, when I ran that from the command line, it created some NUnit results, which were testresult.xml. And then here you can say, I would like my report in HTML, Word, JSON, Excel, Dynamic HTML, Cucumber, or you can choose all of them if you want. So here I've just chosen Dynamic HTML, click Generate, and what it will do, it'll read through all of your feature files and document those. It will then, if you've given it a results file, it will look at the results file and it will marry up all the results with your features and produce a results of what passed and what failed. So if I click at the top right, open output folder, here it is, Dynamic HTML asked for. Open this up. Here are my results. So over top left, I've got all of the feature files. Well, I've only got one, new entries. Here's that scenario. So all the scenarios would be in here, so I can see the steps. And then on the right, you've actually got a green tick or a red cross for which scenarios passed, which scenarios failed. You've got show overview, so I can see here how many passed, how many failed, and lots. It's a bit boring because I've only obviously got one scenario and one feature file here. But this is all open source. This is free, so it doesn't really matter what you're using here. You can actually use this to produce reports on your feature files, and you can even tie it into your results files if you wanted to.
I've got to go now, Tom.
Yeah, no problem.
Running for a week. Thank you ever so much for your time.
That's a pleasure, no problem. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I've overrun a little bit there. Right, okay. So there's only one little bit of this actually I wanted to show you. Emma, you asked about continuous integration. Well, as you've seen, we can run our projects, our Visual Studio projects, we can BDD projects, we can run them from the command line. So yes, you can use any continuous integration tool to do this because, you know, continuous integration tools can execute command line. So if I open up, I've got Jenkins running on this machine, so I'm just going to do it in Jenkins, but you know, this is the same idea really, in regardless of what you're using. So if I go into Jenkins, if it's running, yes it is, good, good, good. Okay, so I created a quick job. So here you can see I've got a number of jobs in Jenkins, but here's the job I created for this demo, the Ranorex one, and if I click on it, and I click configure, okay, and if I scroll down, you know, I could integrate this with source control if I wanted, but all I've done for this is kept it very simple. It's just got two steps. The first is a build step, and all this does is what we've just seen. It uses NUnit 3 console to run from the command line, and here is my project. So I've just passed my project in. There's the project, and I've asked it to execute that. I could have another build step in here that builds the Visual Studio project, so I could get it to actually build my BDD Ranorex solution. Then I can get it to execute it, and then I've added another build step here, post build step, which is I've asked it to publish an NUnit test result. And I said, here's the results file, and it's in NUnit format, and publish this. But if I click on post build, you can see, you know, it could be an HTML report, it could be JUnit. Remember, Ranorex 7 onwards produces a JUnit report if you want as well. So I could say, right, here's my JUnit report, and I want you to publish that. I could also add another step saying, right, and when it's finished, I also want to have an email sent to me to tell me whether it passed or failed, and then I can go and look at the results. So you can just create a job to, and you know, this is the important bit here, just to run your project from the command line and produce the results. So if I click build now for this job, and this could be run, you know, at midnight every night, or it could be run if there's a change to the source control, however you want to do it. But there you go, you can see it running that same project. This is all the same project that I demoed today. So this, yeah, it could be scheduled, or it could be triggered from source control changes, whatever you need to do. And once it's finished, there we go, so that's finished. And I could look at the test result because it's output that NUnit test result. And here are the results. And if I go into here, my feature files, I can go into the feature files, and then in here I can see the scenarios. And in this case, I can see that it just passed. If it had failed, I'd have some more interesting information. You can also see the console output. So here are my steps. There's the given, when, then, and they were all done, all successful. So yeah, you can integrate this with any, you know, any continuous integration tool, because all you're doing is running your compiled project from the command line and producing some results.
Thanks, Tom. That was useful.
Right, I do apologise. As usual, I've talked far too much.
I should actually apologize to you, because it was me pushing Emma to get this done, because I know I want a few stakeholders to understand the work, what we are doing and how we want to evolve from here. So really, really appreciate your time today.
Okay.
So out of goodwill, you have done it. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh no, that's fine. Yeah, I think the important thing to remember is, I mean, BDD is great. I really like BDD because it's collaborative, it's easy to understand, and it creates that separation between the business layer and the technology layer. But I suppose the thing, but the trade-off is that the technology layer becomes a bit harder because we lose things like record and replay and object repositories. So it puts more of a burden on the person that's writing the automation code. But from the business perspective, it's great because it's very transparent. We can see exactly what we're testing in the application, and everyone can collaborate and join in. We can produce results. We can plug it into continuous integration. So it's a great framework, but you just need to bear in mind that you have to sort of think about the person who's going to be writing the automation code, because it puts quite a lot of work on them.
I know. That's the point I was trying to
right, okay. Yeah, exactly right. But yes, it is possible, if you're using Ranorex, as I've just demonstrated there, it's possible to do it with Ranorex, and you can test with Ranorex. Ranorex supports, web, desktop apps, mobile apps, so you can kind of test anything under BDD with Ranorex.
Thanks, Tom. Really, really, really good demo. Thank you.